Vanquish Souls is an archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's based on fighting games. More specifically, they're based on tag-based fighting games like Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Blazblue Cross Tag Battle, or the soon-to-be released 2XKO. And this style of tag-based gameplay is best shown in how each of the cards in this particular archetype can call down quote assists to activate their effects. You're virtually playing with your hand shown to your opponent and daring them to stop you. And I think this high-paced, tag-based fighting game is incredibly fitting for Yu-Gi-Oh! As it is a card game that encourages high-paced, destructive gameplay, much like how I think a casual would view these tag-based fighting games. So I thought it would be fun to go through all the cards and talk about what I think they are when relating them back to fighting games. Starting with the card that starts off Vanquish Soul Raisin. Raisin, if I had to guess what kind of character he'd be, is the Shoto archetype of character, or a Shoto-esque character. Shotos are defined in the fighting game glossary as a character that has a fireball, a Shoryuken, and a Tatsu. The reason why I think Raisin would fit into the role of the Shoto is because Shotos are oftentimes the main characters of their respective games. Characters like Ryu from Street Fighter, Hyde from Under Night, and Grand from Granblue Fantasy Vs. Rising are all Shoto/Shoto-esque characters that are the face of their games. And I think when one were to think of Vanquish Soul as an archetype, Raisin, the card that generally starts off every combo in the deck, would be the face of this particular archetype, being played at 3 in every list, therefore being the Shoto of this archetype. I think the coolest thing about Raisin though is that if he shares a column with another monster, he can destroy that card, which mimics how fighting games are played even in tag-based ones. The next card, Vanquish Soul Heavy Borger, is most definitely the grappler of this archetype. He has a big body, he has giant hands that are meant to grab you, and the cyborg aesthetic is reminiscent of characters like Potemkin from Guilty Gear and Tager from Blazblue. But perhaps the most telling trait that this card is a grappler is how this card can just burn 1500 life points off of you for essentially free, on top of the potential damage to the life points that come afterward, pushing you into a corner just like how a grappler might play in actual fighting games. I personally hate the grappler matchup no matter what game it is because I always greed by spacing, so don't be like me and don't overextend into Heavy Borger. Vanquish Soul Dr. Madlove would probably be a fan favorite character both aesthetically and playstyle wise if this archetype were to one day be created as an actual game. She reminds me of characters like Kokonoe from Blazblue thanks to all the gadgets that are present in her artwork, which leads me to believe that Dr. Madlove might be a set play character. Set play characters are the type of characters that fish for hard knockdowns to fish for plays that let them set up for cool combos, and this is evident in both her effects. The first is how the opposing monster loses attack and defense, like they have to block on Wake Up. Her other effect mimics that of a snapback, an attack that forces your opponent to switch out their active member for another one, though in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Space it acts as a bounce back to your hand, which honestly is pretty good. Other set play characters would include characters like Milia from Guilty Gear thanks to her discs, Byakuya from Under Night thanks to his webs, and JP from Street Fighter thanks to the departure portals that he can place. Vanquish Soul Pantera is the classic rushdown character that you would see in fighting games. The mid-air kick, the slender build, is reminiscent of characters like Cammy and Juri from Street Fighter. This is further supported by the fact that her ability to pop back row cards, like how rushdown characters, can break through even the strongest of defenses with their fast and strong buttons. Now, the only thing that is a little bit contradictory to the rushdown statement is her stat line as a card. Pantera rocks 1700 attack and 1900 defense, which isn't out of place for a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card stat line, but for rushdown characters, they usually have great offense and poor defense. So perhaps the alternative angle that one might be able to come to the conclusion of for Pantera is that she might actually be more Chun-Li than Juri, and the higher defensive stat line is meant more for her being a charge character, as her stat line doesn't necessarily indicate a rushdown type character, but the stat line could just purely be for balancing the archetype. Vanquish Soul Pluton HG is an interesting character and one that's hard to pinpoint down into a specific archetype. It's a sentient slime who reminds me of Arakune from Blazblue, and sure, Pluton HG might be inspired by someone like Arakune, but I think it might be something else. These slime blob characters tend to be in line with mimic/copy characters like 12 from Street Fighter, Double from Skullgirls, and Rogue from all the X-Men games that she's a part of whenever she steals your moves. I'm more inclined to believe that Pluton HG is a mimic character thanks to its effect allowing for it to change its attack or defense depending on what types of cards you have in your hand, allowing it for it to copy the offense or defense of your assists. Vanquish Soul Jiaolong is the other consistency card of the archetype and a card that perfectly complements Raisin thanks to their typing both being fire. which is why I think Xiaolong falls into the category of cool rival character that isn't necessarily a bad guy character to Raisin. Someone like Seth from Under Night, Kai Keese from Guilty Gear, or even someone like Ken from Street Fighter who is both a friend and rival. Because of this, Xiaolong could be a Shoto type character, but I think Xiaolong is a stance change character. And this is shown in his specific trap card, Vanquish Soul Snow Devil, where he trades the flames in the original monster artwork for that of cold snowing mist, like Yuzuriha from Under Night, or since we're on the topic of mist, Johnny from Guilty Gear Xrd. Xiaolong reminds me of a character that's really cool, has really powerful and broken tools, but has an incredibly high skill ceiling, aka the characters I want to play but give up after 3 sessions because my fingers can't keep up. Vanquish Soul Caesar Valius is the boss monster of the archetype and also represents the boss character in this quote fighting game. Some of my favorite boss monsters in fighting games are characters like Kuon from Under Night, the many awesome King of Fighter bosses with my personal favorite being Psyche, and the inspiration for Caesar Valius himself, Susanoo. Its high stat line in 3000 attack also helps indicate that Caesar Valius is the boss monster, but its effect that lets it ignore enemy effects and then destroying a card on the field is quite literally what I think a fan-made Blazblue archetype Susanoo effect would be if he was magically teleported into the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. Caesar Valius, unlike Raisin, who has to be in the same column, can pop a card anywhere on the field, making Caesar a suitable boss monster and a suitable boss character in the Vanquish Soul archetype. Raka the Vanquisher, the only extra deck monster of the archetype, is actually a defeated hero of the past that lost to Caesar Valius in a duel before. Because of this, Raka the Vanquisher is the reason why the archetype is called Vanquish Soul, and he's a soul that's been vanquished by Caesar Valius, and why Caesar Valius is the big bad boss of the fighting game story, like how Ukuma kills Gouken in Street Fighter, though let's not talk about Street Fighter 4. This is evident in the fact that he has the Calamity Caesar Spear, another card that I'll be talking about in a little bit, sticking through its chest, and why it has 0 attack. But while Raka the Vanquisher is a fallen hero, its soul still persists, as its effect can search cards in your deck or your graveyard. Raka the Vanquisher might be the Vanquished Soul. When it comes to spells and traps, there are 2 categories that I put these cards into. The first is a super move card that's tied specifically to a character. Cards like Vanquish Soul, Calamity Caesar, Vanquish Soul, Dust Devil, Vanquish Soul, Snow Devil, and Vanquish Soul, Trinity Burst are all super moves or burst moves that you would see in fighting games. Caesar Calamity is Caesar Valius' super move and one that we saw in the Raka the Vanquisher. Dust Devil and Snow Devil sharing the devil name also enforces the idea that Raisin and Xiaolong are rivals. These 3 cards are just your standard cinematic supers that you would spend your meter for. And then the card Trinity Burst being like that of you calling down the rest of your squad to deal all your super moves at once, like in Marvel vs. Capcom, to finish off your opponent. The next category are for the remaining 2 cards, Stake Your Soul and Continue, which are references to fighting games as a whole. Stake Your Soul is something that an announcer would say before saying the round 1 line. For example, in Blazblue, the announcer will say, "The wheels of fate are turning, Rebel 1," before you and your opponent start pressing buttons against each other. So for the Vanquish Soul game, it would be something like Stake Your Soul, round 1. And then Continue is a reference to you needing to put in more quarters into the arcade cabinet once you lose to the opponent playing in the cabinet across from you, or when you run out of lives in the arcade mode run. And in case you didn't notice, Vanquish Soul is VS for short, further enforcing the fighting game influence that this archetype has. Overall, Vanquish Soul is one of my favorite archetypes in fighting games, even if I'm awful at piloting this deck. From a gameplay perspective, I like that my hand is essentially open to the opponent, like how you can see your opponent's team in a fighting game. And while this is probably the most bricky deck I've played as a fighting game fan, it's a lot of fun seeing all the references and nods that this archetype has to one of my favorite genres of video games. I really hope Konami hasn't abandoned this archetype and we get more support for this deck in the future. This has been JaeAIK, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time.